Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is The Take for Market Rebellion, and the markets continue to be extremely choppy. We've been talking about that Monday. We talked about it Tuesday. We talked about it Wednesday. We had an unbelievable sell-off yesterday, and that was really, it started off as a market that was already showing some pressure early. In the pre-market, we'd seen the markets moving all over the place, primarily to the downside, and then that just continued. There was a huge acceleration early into the day, and that's where the markets just seemed to hover around, about down 700 points yesterday. So just incredible amounts of pressure, and a lot of that due to the fact that we are starting to see more and more outbreaks. The focus, again, we talked about this focus going back and forth and back and forth. Well, it was back on the coronavirus and obviously some of the hot spots and what is going on. And obviously part of that, even playing into that, is Apple. And Apple just choosing to close some of their stores. That's put out a few alarm bells for people, and not necessarily against Apple, the stock, but just about why would they make those kind of rash moves? Well, they're making those moves from a safety perspective, and unfortunately, some of the read-through for that is a little bit of the fear factor, which is why we saw the markets selling off as much as they were yesterday. So what were some of the areas that were getting hit the worst? It sort of lines up like we've been talking about. We've been talking about the choppy markets. We've been talking about which are the coronavirus type stocks that are getting pushed around. But cruise ships, when you look at the cruise ship companies down about 12% across the board, that's a pretty painful move once again. They obviously have recovered off of their lows, but still continue to have a lot of pressure. And every time we come up with something in the coronavirus category that it puts in fear, those are some of the names that are going to get hit. Casinos, another spot. Look yesterday, you look at Wynn Resorts down about 10%. These are pretty big moves. And then you look over at the hotels. You look at Marriott, a big major player. That was down about 6% yesterday. Airlines in general across the board have been getting somebody takes the leadership each and every day. It seems to be American, unfortunately, to the downside as the leader oftentimes. Yesterday, they were down about 6%. So you kind of get the sense of how much pressure is getting put on different areas of the marketplace based upon what the focus of each and every day really is. And energy, well, when you look at the price of oil and it's kind of slipping back, and yesterday it slipped back about 5-6%, somewhere in that sort of category. Then you immediately look to the Exxons and the Chevrons, and then you look to the next beta type names, and you see a lot of that movement. And the severe movement yesterday, Diamond Offshore, I looked at Oxy, I looked at One Oak. Those are the kind of names where you really are seeing big beta moves out of those names relative to what you're seeing out of Exxon and Chevron, but that just continues to play out as well. So we're looking at a VIX. We talked about a range. Well, we have to extend that range out a little bit from 31 to 35, call it 31 to 37, sort of in that range. And closing out yesterday around 35. Where are we today? Well, we're still kind of hanging right around that 35 level. But the last thing I'll say about yesterday was the volumes, because we did have a couple of days in a row where we had very, very low volume. We talked about Monday, we talked about Tuesday, still extreme volumes, but in relative terms, well off of what we've been seeing for the month of June. So yesterday, we returned back to those monstrous June volumes, right around those average levels. We traded about 32.8 million contracts yesterday. Extremely busy day as people have been shifting around. Now, we just went through that quad witching and all the rest of that. And is there some repositioning? I would say absolutely. So that adding to, along with that big move to the downside, you see a lot of volume getting back involved in the marketplace. We sure did have an incredible amount of unusual option activity yesterday in all kinds of different directions. But specifically, what really stood out, the metals. When we look at gold, GLD, SLV, many of the different miners that just seem to hit each and every day, but we've talked about that move from 1,700 to 1,800 in the GLD. So that's been something that, or in gold, but that's been something affecting obviously GLD. We have seen so much option paper, almost all of it, very, very bullish even from these levels. So obviously the perception is that we're going to see a bit more of a move to the upside. Maybe we get a breakout in gold. That's the perception of what the markets are telling us right now on the option side. Will they be right? We'll see how it played out. Matter of fact, yesterday we talked about this, and we talked about there was some short-term paper there, there was some medium-term paper there, and some fairly far out paper when you look at the GLD. That was shifting out towards the latter part of the year. We have even seen, and this is one of the things that is very unusual, seeing some options that have been trading, and GLD is one of these names where you're going all the way out to January of this coming year, 2021. So a lot of different ways that people are trying to position to see if they can kind of catch some of these moves that we're seeing in some of the metals markets. But GLD absolutely hit multiple times yesterday, and it has hit quite a few times in the month of June. So unemployment claims going into today. Well, 14 weeks, and we're looking at about 47 million Americans. So that's certainly something that's concerning. It was actually a little bit higher than even anticipated in this particular round, and California being one of the very highest. I'll tell you, with the coronaviruses right now, we added about 45,000. So that is really where so many eyeballs are focusing on right now. And as we do see that, we see pressure. So today, had pressure on the markets very early. Really pretty substantial pressure, but then that eased off a little bit. We actually got all the way back into the green. We're only about 30 minutes into the trading session, 45 minutes into the trading session right now. We've seen a market that had moved from being down 200 plus points to right now, I'm looking over at the TV and it's showing me right now, we're up about 60 points. So you can almost scratch some of the things that I was looking at and wanting to talk about, but I still think it's very important because we talk about volatility and we talk about the choppiness of these markets. So this really does play in, and we had a big turn. Where did that turn come from? You take a look at the financials. The financials, absolutely. There was a point, everything was moving to the downside. We were down nearly 1% across all the indices. And all of a sudden you look over and you see Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, some of the Dow stocks starting to pull back up and start moving into positive territory, and then moving even higher as they moved up in very, very rapid pace. And you look at the XLF, but also take a look at Bank of America, take a look at Citi, take a look at Wells Fargo. So this is fairly broad. This is the financials, as I said. This isn't just a couple of names that are moving to the upside. What's pulling on the NASDAQ? The NASDAQ right now still in negative territory. So you're seeing that kind of movement where you're seeing now it's the Dow that's moving to the upside, but the NASDAQ sort of pulling on things a little bit. Well, look at those semiconductors right now. You look at Intel, AMD, Micron, Applied Materials, those kind of names kind of pulling on the semiconductor indices right now. So that's an area that's had so much strength, so much power. We talk about some of the big, huge Power 5 names, but then when you take the next level down, you look at a lot of these various NASDAQ names that are involved in the semiconductor space. They have been absolutely ramping it up over the last couple of weeks, call it even a month and a half or so. And I'll tell you what, the incredible thing is that's been part of this broader piece to what we've been talking about here on the take for a long time, this broader move to the upside in the markets, not just relying on the Power 5. Of course, they've been performing, but looking at some of the areas, we've talked about biotech, we've talked about semiconductors and housing names. There's all kinds of different areas that have actually been participating along the way as well. But these financials, that really has been the buoy right now, and a pretty nice move to the upside. I'm looking at the S&P is back to flat, NASDAQ approaching flat, and meanwhile the Dow's up just about 0.25% right now. So pretty nice move. Volatility index still trading right around 35. So let's get a little bit of unusual option activity for you. So we've seen it in just about every, believe it or not, 45 minutes into the day, and we've seen multiple different sectors where we've been seeing some buying. In the financials, we'd seen a little bit of buying, even saw a little bit of buying in the XLF. It wasn't huge, but we did see some buying in the XLF. Yesterday, we even saw some in the KRE. So you're talking about the regional banking index. So we have seen some folks kind of putting their toe in the water a little bit on the press down yesterday and this morning included, where they're looking at some of the financials, even a couple specific financial names. But this one kind of stood out for me. Limited brands. We don't talk as much about retail. I do talk about, obviously we talk about Amazon a lot, but we also talk about and focus on some of the Walmart and Target and Costco and Home Depot and some of those stories. Obviously, when you take a look at some of the other ones, Ross Stores included, TJ Maxx, but limited brands. This one's pretty interesting. Stock's trading around 1380, and we had these July 2nd call buyers. That's just 1 week out. That's this coming week. So this isn't giving you a whole heck of a lot of time, but a 1 week out, that's been pretty standard. They're buying the 14 strike calls for about 60 up to 90 cents. and some really large paper in there, some option paper coming in there, buying those calls. I am not in these just yet. I'll take a look at them after I get off, but I wanted to get up here and get ready because today I'll be on the halftime report. We'll have some unusual option activity. We're going to answer some of those questions that people have that they send into the halftime. If you want to be one of those people, send it on in. That'd be really, really great. But I'll tell you what, looking forward to the halftime. We got a great lineup. I'm looking at it at the rundown in front of me, and it's a really impressive group of guys. So looking forward to it, and gals. Last thing I'll say, if you're looking at some of the options paper, and we talk about the smart money all the time, and part of this is part of the educational process that we go through. So a lot of it is the mechanics of how things work in the options world, the pricing and all the rest of that, so you can have a better understanding. You don't want to go into something blind. You have to understand where the risks are, because there certainly are some, and the ways that you can actually take some of the risk away by using the options. A lot of different ways that you can be in the markets and using options. You got to be educated. You got to have a very full understanding of that whole process. But that's something that I think is really, really important. It's something that you've got to focus on each and every day, is understanding these markets as we try to navigate through some of these the craziness that we're seeing each and every day. But have a great day. We'll see you on the halftime report. Got some great stuff coming at you, and some new unusual option activity hitting at you as well. Have a great day of trading.